Hello, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful World Folklore Day special with the phenomenal Juliet Marillier. Welcome, Juliet.
Hi, Karen. Very nice to be here.
Isn't it wonderful that there's a World Folklore Day?
Yeah, I thought that was fantastic. I didn't actually realize there was until you told me about it, but I think there's an increased interest in folklore and storytelling and all that sort of thing these days. And I think it's good for all of us.
It is. I think about, growing up in Ireland and hearing all these tales, and it gave me a really good foundation to life, I believe. But I'd love to hear your views on why folklore and folklore tales especially is important.
Sure. Well, I grew up on tales as well. I guess my even though I was in New Zealand, I was far from the ancestral place, which was Scotland in my case. But um, there was a lot of Scottish culture in the city where I grew up, and my parents used to tell stories and read stories and play music. And so I guess fairly early on, I understood the importance of history and family history and your ancestry and the place you came from, and it's all related to storytelling. So um, I think that gives you a very good as you said, it gives you a good foundation in life. You may be hearing stories of the amazing and wonderful and where there's dragons and fairies and whatever it is, but in some way it all relates to the life we're living today. And I guess I look back to an age where storytelling was always around the fire with the community, and it was not just a means of entertainment, but also the stories, folkloric stories, fairy tales, mythology, legends, all have some kind of a lesson that we can learn or comfort that they can give us that helps us in our daily lives. And you won't necessarily see it in a story as the problems that you face in your own life now or in whatever period in history, but it's something that's generic, that's built in. So the dragon in the story might actually in your life or my life be some person that we're having to face up to or some circumstance that we're having to deal with that's making us frightened or uncomfortable. The problem of the monster in the wood might just be the fact that it's someone that's a bit different from yourself, that you're not used to, culturally uncomfortable with, or someone who's frightening in some way that you have to learn to be brave and to understand and so forth. But the story itself can be taken just as pure fantasy, something made up, something that's entertaining, or you can listen and think, wow, that actually means something to me personally in my own life. And I think those stories really help people to be brave and strong and to understand difference and become more tolerant of difference. And, back in those days, people would have had big problems like, I guess we do now, flood and fire and famine and, people going hungry, people being displaced. Those problems are still in the world. And in those days, people would probably have thought of spirits, some sort of supernatural presences that perhaps they would have, I'm not going to say praying because I don't want to get into religion, but, goddesses that relate to streams and rivers or the sea or the mountains, and those were the important sort of spiritual presences of place that people would talk to or ask questions of. So it's no wonder that a whole body of stories grew up with supernatural beings as part of the storytelling, and you being Irish will know all about, all the supernatural beings that sort of inhabit the landscape around you and how wonderful and varied they are. Yeah.
Beautiful. It's the imagery, isn't it? Though, as a child, whenever you are, you're listening to the folklore, it ignites the imagination. It's not somebody talking to you and trying to get you to understand how life works and make you resilient and let you learn all those lessons, but you learn them through story, which a child can relate to and connect with in a way. And as you're growing up, it's more of a way of embracing the wisdoms that come through our ancestors and through story. It's so much more gentler, really, isn't it?
It is. That's right. That's something I keep talking about when I'm talking to other writers and writers who are perhaps just starting out. And I have to make that. I made that mistake talking to you, saying lesson, and I don't mean lesson in terms of child, sit down on the mat, you will listen to this, you know, you're be kind to strangers, or, you know, or don't trust strangers, or whatever. It just, yeah, as you say, it's a much, it's a subtle way of teaching, you know, not lesson in terms of you believe this, but, you know, that a life lesson, if you like. And yes, the child and the adult really reading those stories is fascinated by as you said, the imagery, the tropes that go into the stories, whether it's, you know, the story of the enchanted rose that might be dangerous or might lead to good things, or a mirror that shows you something, you look into it and you don't see your own face but somebody else's, or the wonderful one which I've used once, which is the musical instrument, usually a harp, that's made from the hair and the bones of someone who's died unjustly. And, you know, when you play this harp, it tells the truth about what happened. That's a really powerful story. And I know that things like that, those are the things that I've remembered mostly out of the stories that I learned as a child. And those lead you into the storytelling, deeper into the storytelling world, don't they? You know,
it is. It's the depth, isn't it, Juliet? The depth of the message and the conversations that you can have, and use these stories as an illustration of that. In, you know, and some are really, you know, they're going, oh my goodness, like the thought of someone sitting stringing a bow or whatever, a harp that has been made out of bones and hair, whatever. It's just like, oh my goodness, you know, it's hard to fathom. But the magic of all of that, to think that it comes alive through song and music, and you're very much a musical person, Juliet.
Yes, that's right. And yeah, I think music's very important. I certainly have written a lot about the magic of music, or music as magic, in my stories. And I guess almost the way, you know, the way you tell a story the way you tell a traditional story is a little bit like music. I mean, apparently the Druids used to sing stories. We don't know how historical that is, but that's the tradition. You would sing the story rather than speak the story. And I think that a lot of those fairy tales, when you're telling them, they fall into a beautiful rhythm that is like singing or like poetry. You know, the way often in fairy tales there are three of something. So there's, you know, don't know, three bears immediately comes to mind, but three is one of those magical numbers, like seven. And so you've got 7 horse, and you've got 3 little pigs, and you've got, you know, sort of codes. And I've found when I'm writing that I write in patterns of 3, which relates to music as well. So, you know,
yeah, that's the number of the fairies, isn't it? That's the Irish coming out.
I'm going off the track here, but, you know, yeah,
No, I
I
love
think
it.
that, you know, there's a lot of symbolism in there too, but you don't take it as symbolism. You just look at it as the story with the, you know, the wonderful magical things in it and the strange things that happen. And I think as a young listener or reader, you believe it as you go. You might not believe it totally literally afterwards, but you go into that world of the story and you can believe that all these things are real. And that's wonderful for your sort of broadening your imagination, and, you know, broadening your view of the real world as well, I think. I always sort of look back into history and I think, you know, there's such weird things in some of these old stories, but I feel as if they must all have been in some way true way back when, long, long ago, in a very different kind of culture. And I'm not saying that, you know, if you go out, you'll find fairies at the bottom of the garden, but I'm sure that there's some sort of kernel of truth there right from the start. And perhaps it's been changed and elaborated over the years, because, you know, those stories are designed to be told and retold over and over by different people. And every time someone else tells a story, it's a little bit changed and a little bit different. And sometimes, you know, sometimes in history, they've been changed to suit the culture of the time. So, you know, those fairy tales that were told in the French court, which came from something much older, suddenly became stories about how to behave, how young women should behave and how young men should behave, because that suited that particular time and culture. And then they changed again, you know, changed in the
You read my mind, because I was going to ask you, how do you think folklore stories have changed over time? And they do adapt. They're so adaptable to any kind of you know, time. You know, that, like, what the retellings that we have at Serenity Press, and how you write, they're for an audience now, so that they can relate and connect to an audience, so that they are very adaptable, aren't they?
They are, yes, and I like that. I mean, I know there have been some periods when strange things have happened with fairy tales, particularly like the Victorian era, where they were a bit sort of proper about manners and so forth. And I think the darker parts of those ancient stories were perhaps glossed over a bit, and we got the pretty little fairies with fluttery wings and so forth. But you know, people like that as well. So yes, it changes. And more recently, a lot of stories being written by authors who do quite a bit of experimentation with the story, subvert the story quite considerably, more than I do in mine, and do some quite experimental things with them. That too is great. You know, it's a time when people love to read those kinds of stories. And every time, you know,
Can't you?
something new.
Yeah. Can't you think back to those times? Like, can you imagine how harrowing it must have been, like, say, to live in the 12th century or even, you know, before that? And then these stories would have been, you know, they come from truth, but it brings people to an escapism, you know, for them, you know, bring in some magic and some,
Yes.
you know, just some imagination into life as well.
Yes, because it must have been, yeah, indeed, as you said, it were very, very tough times to live in, you know, times when probably the people who were not so well off would be, you know, well, they would still be telling stories, because stories are a comfort in times of, you know, those times of sort of strife and danger and poverty and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, Julia, thank you. We could talk about this all day, I know, but we are doing a little 10-minute video. So thank you so much for joining in today to celebrate World Folklore Day, so we could give an insight to our readers and listeners about it. So thank you so much, Juliet.
Thank you, Karen.
Everyone, if you want to go and check out more about Juliet Marillier, you can see her website down below, scrolling along the bottom. It's www.julietmarillier.com. And this is, love it. Love,
That's
love,
very
love.
well. Yes,
Mother Thorn. Mother Thorn. So special.
Worth buying just for the cover.
Yeah, and I've got both covers behind me, see?
Yes, very good.
And under this video, I will actually tag an interview that I did with Juliet about Mother Thorn on release day. Thank you so much for joining us, Juliet.
Thank you.